You're listening to the Wellness Works podcast with Dr. Kris McClusky. This podcast takes you on a journey of lifelong health and wellness. We talk to top health experts and explore the real truth you're not always hearing about, the options you have to beat sickness and disease. And now, your host, Dr. Kris McClusky.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Wellness Works. This is Dr. Kris McClusky, your health and wellness expert here on the Metro East Side of St. Louis, Missouri. We've had some incredible podcasts as of late. We hope that this is information you guys can actually put into action in your own lives and to go ahead and help you live an increased quality of life, because after all, that's our purpose, is to help as many people as possible live as high a quality of life as possible without the use of drugs or surgery. So we find ourselves helping human beings from the infant stages of life to youth to adolescence to young adulthood. We take care of a lot of young families and even folks that are aging and looking for quality of life down the road. So today's episode is going to be based on one of my favorite topics, and that is wellness as it relates to sports and athletics. I was blessed as a young man in the 80s to grow up down on the field at Busch Stadium, hanging out with the St. Louis Cardinals. One of my father's closest friends was a first base and eventually third base coach for those guys, and I developed a love for not only baseball but athletics, and was a three-sport varsity athlete in high school, and went ahead and gave up athletics in college to pursue my dream of becoming a doctor. But we love to help athletes at all levels. And I have a great friend of mine on the recording today, Dr. Alex Vidan. And Dr. Vidan is the owner of Vidan Family Chiropractic over in Clayton, Missouri. He's a worldwide speaker with Dr. Brad Glowacki and the Art of the Close program. Dr. Vidan just got back from Europe doing some events over there. He was the official chiropractor for the 2011 World Champion St. Louis Cardinals, continues to work with the team. He's a health and wellness advisor who's been featured on Fox 2 News here in St. Louis over 160 times. Dr. Vidan brings a wealth of knowledge to the health and wellness arena, and we're just so blessed to have him on the call. So, Dr. Vidan, can you hear us?
I certainly can, man. Thank you very much for that great intro.
And I tell you what, we just appreciate you carving some time out to share with our listeners. Could you just tell us a little bit about who you are and why you do what you do?
Yeah, the way that I got started with chiropractic is pretty simple. I was pre-med for whenever I was in undergrad, and I was actually working at the hospital, and I kept on talking to all these docs, and I would go in to all the rotations, and I would sit in on surgeries and help out with all of it. And I just kept on thinking, man, there has got to be a better way to help these people before they get to this point of surgery. And I kept on speaking with docs and kept on talking with these MDs and these surgeons and everyone else, and they felt the same way. Their frustration was the same as mine, in the fact that they wanted to help people before they got to this part of surgery or drugs or anything else. But essentially their hands were tied because the line was so long outdoor that they were to stop and try to get to another point and get to a point before they got to surgery. Then it was kind of a futile cause for them, in the fact that they were just so overbooked with everything else. And we all know that because we've tried to get in to see our MDs or for some reason or another, and you can't see them for 2, 3, 4 months, whatever it is down the line. And so my frustration was the fact that I wanted to help people before they got to that point. And so I got introduced to chiropractic. And when I got introduced to chiropractic, it's like a whole new world opened up to me, in the fact that I looked at it from the perspective of, wow, these guys can not only help people whenever they have symptoms, but they can also keep them from having symptoms. These chiropractors can do something in a whole new level, in a whole new way. And I was really interested in helping people without the use of drugs or surgery, and helping them before they got to that point. And, you being a Saint, I mean, we're right here, we're neighbors, basically. I kind of look at you and I, and even whenever I go over there and I speak at Barnes Jewish, I speak to the surgery centers and I speak to all their departments. And whenever I'm talking with them, they're saying the same thing. They're thankful that you and I are out doing the things that we're doing to keep people from having to go there and having to have the surgery. So I would just get fired up about it, and I'm excited, and it's a true passion for me to get out and speak and talk to people and talk to the public about what we can do as chiropractors and what we can do to help them, because it's so much more than just pain relief. And you know that. You and I have talked about that before.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a great segue, actually, Doc, into the first topic that I'd like to talk about, and that's really the difference between how chiropractic and wellness applies to the injured person as opposed to how it could apply to the basic function and performance of an individual from a lifestyle standpoint, but more specifically from an athletic standpoint. So you kind of mentioned that once people are injured, a lot of times we jump straight to drugs and surgery. So, chiropractic can be supportive to an individual suffering from an injury to allow them to heal faster, whether it be with our care individually or whether we're working in conjunction with a medical doctor who's applying some therapeutic approach, whether it be from a physical therapy or a drug or a surgery standpoint. So once people are injured, we want to address them as non-invasively as possible, but we want to really focus on the human body before they get to that point. I love it that you mentioned that from a performance standpoint. So could you just talk for about a minute on the difference of how you would look at an injured person as opposed to, what if somebody walked through your door, Dr. Vidan, and said, I don't have any symptoms, I feel great. Do you still think that I need to be checked by you?
Oh, I love whenever patients walk in with that scenario where they're coming in, they're saying, look, because we get a lot of that. We get a lot of patients that walk in our door. The majority of patients that walk in my door are walking in because they say, hey, look, I hear that you can help me with headaches or back pain or neck pain or whatever it is. But I heard about this chiropractic thing and I'd like to try that instead of going the route of drugs and surgery and everything else. And whenever we get the patients that come in, and we get so many of them too, but we get them that come in and they don't have a major complaint. We say, you know what, no problem. Let's just take a look at this and see exactly what's going on and find out how we can best support your body in functioning at its optimal level. So it's the same thing with the pro athletes that we take care of. I'm looking at them and saying, hey, let's just find out exactly what's going on and how it is that we can best help you so that we can get you out on the field or keep you out on the field so that you're functioning at the highest level. The vast majority of the pro athletes that we take care of aren't coming to see us because they have injuries. They're coming to see us because they need to make sure that they're finely tuned, they're ready to get out there and perform at their highest level possible. Well, we need to be doing that same thing from the same perspective. There's no reason that we shouldn't be doing that as the general public and saying, well, I should be the best dad I can be. I should be the best employee that I can be. I need to be the best spouse that I can be. And I know that chiropractic can help me with those things because it's going to keep my body functioning at the highest level possible. And that's what we want.
So you mentioned function, and that's an important key. How do we know if our body's functioning properly or not? And, over at Dr. Vidan's office and at our office, we have some really high-tech testing that we can do to check signaling in your body. So within just a couple of short minutes, we can run a quick non-invasive test, have immediate results, and determine how well your body, in fact, is functioning. We don't wait for our vehicles to break down or have a problem before we have them checked, right?
Sure.
We're going to get the oil change. We're going to check the alignment. We're going to make sure our fluids are proper because we want to prevent that big event from happening down the road. So from a cost and a time standpoint, it serves us well to check the function of the human body ahead of time, especially as athletics are concerned. So what I'm hearing is not only every athlete, but really every human could be served well by having this testing done to check the signaling in their body. Is that true?
I completely agree, 100%.
Okay, that's fantastic. Let's go into athletics, youth athletics. It's a hot topic. There's a lot going on.
Oh, yeah.
The common knowledge is my son or daughter is an athlete. They're playing ball, they're running, they're jumping, and that's what's going to keep them healthy. And there are healthful consequences to youth athletics, but there are also negative consequences from a health standpoint. We mentioned a vehicle. I use the analogy that Grandma's Ford Taurus probably needs to go to the shop every 3,000 miles to have an oil change and check the alignment and such. But a performance-based car, let's say a race car, they have to take a pit stop every so many laps just to stay out on the track because there's extra wear and tear. So could you talk just a little bit about some of the healthful consequences and then the unhelpful consequences, and what should we do to mitigate those less than helpful consequences for the young athlete?
Yeah, and I love the way that you position that too with the car analogy, because I use that in my office too. I love that because we can all relate to that. And with our young athletes, it's the same thing. The problem is that we look at it as parents and as adults. We look at it and say, whenever I was young, I did 2-a-days for 4 weeks straight, and we did this and we did all those things. Well, we're learning now that the ways that we did things back then weren't always the best. They weren't always the best way to position it and weren't always the best ways to do it. In fact, Major League Baseball has it set up now to where they're looking at things for a pitch count for pitchers, right? They look at the same thing for football, where they say, hey, look, NFL football leagues to look at it and say, how is it that these players, these young athletes are training and being trained so that it's more functionally designed, so that we can make sure that they don't get those injuries so that they can continue to pitch into, high school and college and maybe minors or pros. Whatever their goals and objectives are, we want to make sure we're keeping them out on the field, because the problem is, like you said, they get to a point where they overtrain, and because they have way too many pitches, they run way too many routes, they do too many squats, they do whatever it is in a way that becomes unhealthy, and so that we get these areas of the body that become overstressed or overdeveloped, and other ones that are understressed and underdeveloped. And because of that, we get these imbalances. And when we get these imbalances, we start to then see it to where we fall apart. Just like, I'll go back to the analogy with your car. Whenever the car gets out of alignment, tires are wearing down unevenly, and we start to notice that there's a problem with the pull in the car, right? We'll shift to a side and we'll drag to one side. Well, it's the same thing with our bodies. As our bodies start to wear down incorrectly and start to be developed incorrectly, then we start to see that there become long-term consequences. And when we have these young athletes that are being pushed and pulled and directed into just do this one thing, you are at a middle school or elementary level, now you are a pitcher, and that's it. You're just going to be a pitcher from now on. The problem is that developmentally, they start to have problems in that, not in the fact that, hey, you should never be a pitcher or never be a shortstop or a big hitter or whatever it is. But the problem gets to be to where they start to say, look, you're just hitting too much, or you're just pitching too much, or you're just doing way too much of those things, so that we start to get those areas that start to wear down more and more and more. So,
yeah, that's. I mean, gosh, again, I couldn't agree with you more. So what I'm hearing is that it's certainly reasonable that the young athlete, it stands to reason that a young athlete should probably have their structure and alignment checked maybe more frequently than somebody with a more sedentary lifestyle. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I completely agree with you that, we take care of, peewees to pros is where I like to look at it here at my office. And those peewees, I mean, they're out there. Usually they're on multiple different leagues and they're playing a lot. They're just out there all the time. But we as adults don't usually think about, like you said, they actually are a race car, but they're a very young race car. And we need to get them out there and make sure that as they're running those laps and as they're doing everything in the race car analogy, that we keep them out on the track so that later on down the road, they can continue to love the sport and continue to love the game, because, you and I both grew up with youth sports. I was a three-sport athlete whenever I was in high school too, and I loved it. That camaraderie, just being part of the team and pushing yourself and challenging yourself was a great thing. And I wish that more and more of these young athletes got introduced to chiropractic, and that's why it's so important that you and I are doing these types of things to get out there and help these young athletes to make sure that they get themselves checked chiropractically. Because look, if every pro team, whether or not it's football, baseball, hockey, I mean, you pick it, basketball, all of them, has a chiropractor that they work with, that's part of their nucleus of their healthcare team. If that's the case, then we all need to look at that as well for our young athletes. We need to look at it from the perspective of what is it that we can do to help them get on the field or stay on the field.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I know you've probably seen this. What I'm seeing is our high school athletes, because they've a lot of times been overworked and overtrained without the proper care to maintain structural balance and alignment and nerve system integrity. When they get to be a sophomore, junior, senior in high school, the testing that we do on them reveals just an unbelievable amount of imbalance and damage. And now this is getting in the way of championships. It's getting in the way of scholarships. And it's really affecting the way that these kids are able to live the rest of their lives. So let's finish up this topic. You mentioned overuse and overtraining. I think a lot of that comes from single repetitive motions, and a lot of that can be due to specializing in certain sports or activities at younger and younger ages. And just want to get your opinion on that topic. There's no doubt that there's a trend in year-round sports, younger and younger and younger. Is that a good thing? What does the research show about the future for those athletes?
Yeah, the research shows that the more focus that they get on just one sport, the greater their chances of having injuries. And I agree with you. There's a vast amount of pressure that's put on these young athletes at a very young age to start saying, hey, you know what? I know that you want to play football, baseball, and soccer, or whatever it is. You want to reach the sports, or you want to play all these other sports, but I'll let you know that you might lose your starting position in this sport. So which one is going to be most important to you? Or, you know what? Our coach doesn't let us play any other sport other than his sport or her sport. And so I'm going to have to drop these other sports because that's the one that I have to stick with. And the problem is that these young athletes, they start to get to a point to where they get injured more and more because of that repetitive motion. I'm not saying anything against the coaches. I want to stress that because I work with a lot of coaches and we love them. They're great guys and their teams are fantastic. We just want to make sure that we're supporting them in getting those championships. We want to make sure that we're supporting them in making sure that they're getting more functional movements in there, that they're making sure that, hey, look, let's look at this from a more dynamic perspective so that we're making sure we have balance. Even golfers, when they're out there, they're only swinging one direction. Well, hey, let's see about doing things in the opposite direction because it's all unilateral, one-sided direction, one-sided movements. When we have one-sided anything, it's not going to be in balance. And when we have that, we get overdevelopment in one area and underdevelopment in another area, which causes problems.
Yeah, so diversifying is important. And even if we want to focus on a certain sport, we've got a lot of kids in our office, and we recommend, hey, in the off season, even go play intramural sport in something else or a rec league just to use different muscle groups and different ranges of motion. It's a really good idea. So, gosh, Dr. Vidan, we really have appreciated having you on the call. We're coming down to the end of this podcast. Just for fun to share some, you've gotten to do some incredible things in your career. I'm going to put you on the spot here. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this. But would you share with us maybe one of your favorite memories as a doctor working with professional athletes?
Oh, man, I got to tell you, Doc, just as you were saying it, it's one of those things where I started to get goosebumps and tingles just as you're saying it, because there's so many amazing memories. And I guess one of the ones that I will share is this. Whenever my son, we're on the parade route, the Cardinals have won the World Series. It's the next day. We're on the parade and we're riding with players, the medical staff. There were so many of us and everything. We were riding with players. Players came and said, hey, would you ride with us? And I had a lot of the players ask me, rode with one of the players and great guy. And we got to be great friends, but we're riding along and my son is waving, and at this time, I think he's like 3.5, 4. And he's waving to everyone, and there's just people as deep as you can see. And he's waving to them all, and he turns to me and he's like, Dad, my arm's getting tired from waving so long. I was like, well, buddy, just take it easy. Take a break. No problem. And so he stops waving and keeps looking at the people for a little bit. He looks at me and looks at the people. He says, Dad, are all of these people here to see me? Yeah. And so I said, yeah, buddy, they're all here to see you. They're absolutely here to see you. And he says, all right, then I'll keep waving. And so I tell that story, because it's a great moment in my life. And it's one of those things that, again, gave me goosebumps and everything else. But I look at it this way, is that the story behind that story is the fact that his why was big enough. His why as to why it is that he wanted to keep on waving, even though that his shoulder was bothering him, even though his arm was tired. He said, you know what? They're here to see me. If they're here to see me, I'm going to step up and do what I need to do. And so I look at it from the same perspective as all of us listening to your podcast. You're stepping up to do what you need to do to help us in the community and make it to where your why is big enough in helping us. And each one of us listening to this podcast need to look at it from the same perspective too. Like, what's my why? Is my why that I want to be the best dad, the best mom, the best spouse, the best employee, the best worker, the best, whatever it is, athlete, all of those things. Find your why and use that as your motivating factor to make sure that you're stepping up and doing whatever it is that you need to do in order to take things to a whole new level for you in your health, in your life, whatever it is.
Dr. Vidan, thank you so much for sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, find your why. If you don't take anything from this podcast, find your why, because it makes everything else in life make so much more sense and fall into place. So thanks for sharing that story. Thanks for sharing some minutes with us. Have loved and appreciated, being colleagues and friends over the years.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to the work that we're going to do together in the future. Again, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully that you guys enjoyed this podcast, and hopefully you can take some tools from it. Go ahead and apply them to your life or friends or family or loved ones' lives. Please rate and review the podcast, share it across social media so together you can help us help more people. Again, this has been Wellness Works. I'm Dr. Kris McClusky, your wellness expert, and we will talk to you guys on future casts. Thank you guys, and God bless.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Wellness Works with Dr. Kris McClusky. If this message spoke to you, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and share with a friend or loved one.